I got off to a bad start in my career. I did my doctoral dissertation at the University of Illinois, though I finished it up in work that I was doing at the University of Washington. And my dissertation involved an analysis of the characteristics of academic areas, because I was getting trained in social and organizational psychology. And so I got this assessment of the characteristics of academic areas. And this is in 1970. I got my degree in 1971. And so what you can see here is that, and hopefully the folks at home can see it, is this analysis that I did of the characteristics of academic areas. And what you find is that all of these areas, mechanical engineering, nuclear engineering, horticulture, astronomy, physics, and so on, are all at this end of the dimension. And what I realized was that those were all areas that had a paradigm, that everybody working in those fields were asking the same questions and pursuing the same issues. And what you see at the other end are the more soft areas. Economics is there, social political science, and there's psychology right there. And so that was my dissertation. And the first bad thing that happened to me was that I went back to Illinois to defend my dissertation. And I had a close friend who was going to do his at 1 o'clock, and I was doing my defense at 10 o'clock. So 10 o'clock rolls around, and they ask difficult, kind of questions. And then I have to leave, right? And then like 45 minutes later, they grudgingly gave me my degree. And they sent me to this methodologist who hadn't been on the committee, who said I had used methods that were inappropriate. And I subsequently did analyses that showed that pretty much they were not inappropriate. But I can remember this is the closest I ever came to committing suicide. I'm on the 9th floor of the new psychology department, and they have a plate glass window, and I'm thinking, how would they feel when they found my body on the sidewalk? And I tell that story to everybody whose dissertation committee I am on. So that was one. And then about 2 months later, I got on a possibility of a job at Purdue University in organizational psychology. So I went there, and during the questioning, the chair of the committee said, well, where do you expect to be in 5 years? And this was 1970. These were groovy times, and we were into all kinds of things. And I said I didn't really know, but I was interested in a lot of different things. So he's driving me out to the airport afterward, and I knew that I hadn't given the right answer. So he says, he asked the question again. I said, I know I didn't give you the right answer, but I'm interested in a lot of things, and I want to pursue. And when we got to their airport, I got out, and he stayed in the car and said, well, it's been nice knowing you, and I left. So I flew back to Seattle, where I was working at the University of Washington. And the next morning I woke up and I decided I was going to get retrained in clinical psychology. And I started doing that at the University of Washington. And in the process, Bob Kohlenberg was in the clinical program, introduced me to B.F. Skinner's work. Now, I hated B.F. Skinner. When B.F. Skinner wrote Beyond Freedom and Dignity, I can remember hoping that he would die soon because he was doing so much harm to society. And I started reading Verbal Behavior. Didn't make any sense to me. So I start reading Science and Human Behavior, and that begins to make sense. And I began to realize that Skinner was saying that here is a way of thinking about behavior that is applicable to all of the issues involved in human behavior. Here was a paradigm. And this work that I had done, which, by the way, ended up being called the Biglan model. You can Google search it. I left the field, but I'm now famous. And I realized that this was really a paradigm that had a systematic set of questions to be pursued to understand human behavior. I went on internship at the University of Wisconsin. I had a $500 book allowance. This is 1972. That was a lot of money. Didn't have a lot of work to do. I'd read everything in behavior therapy and philosophy of science by the time I was done with that year. So Bob Weiss, who's sitting in the second row, and who else was on sabbatical? We lived in his house, and I had his office in Condon Hall, and I can't remember who else. So anyway, I get the opportunity to end up at the University of Oregon, and I was so excited because half of the stuff that I had read during that year in Wisconsin was stuff coming out of here. There was the work that Bob Weiss was doing on marital relations. There was the work that Jerry Patterson and John Reed and others were doing around families. And Jerry had introduced the notion that that the consequences of behavior could affect behavior, and that parents, by what they did in reaction to their kids, affected their behavior. That had never been shown. I mean, Skinner had claimed it, but nobody had really shown it. And then Jerry went on to study the negative interactions of kids, something that Skinner really hadn't talked about, and showed how coercive, conflictual relationships develop in families and how that leads to the development of all of the problems that we're dealing with. So this is a line of research that I followed in a lot of my work. And then there was the work in instruction, which Georgia, my wife, who was nice enough to come with me, there were times when we weren't so sure. And so she got her master's degree in special ed, and there was Ziggy Engelman and Wes Becker and Doug Carnine studying the ways in which you can use these kinds of principles to effectively teach. And then there was all the stuff that Hill Walker and High Hops and Charlie Greenwood were doing on social relations in schools and developing social behavior. So I was just in hog heaven. So I had this, okay, so I'm gonna show you this video that I made in relation to that book. And you could buy the book, which would be wonderful as far as I'm concerned. But if you don't want to buy the book, this is 3 minutes, and you can hold forth at any cocktail party just on the basis of this 3 minutes. So.
My name's Tony Biglan. I've been a scientist at Oregon Research Institute for 35 years. Thanks to advances in behavioral science, we have figured out how to prevent most of the critical problems facing us. I began my study of psychology in the 1960s. I was inspired by people like Bobby Kennedy, who challenged young people to make a difference.
I come to you today to say that we can build a newer and better nation. I say we can do so, that we must do so, and that we will do so.
In the 60s, we had optimism, attitude, and motivation. What was missing was science. But over the past 50 years, we've learned how to ensure that just about every child thrives. First, children need safe and caring environments. We need to keep anger, criticism, and threat to a minimum. The second thing that makes us thrive is positive reinforcement. I'm not talking about M&Ms or money. I'm talking about attention, listening, smiling, touching, hugging, approval, and warmth. All vital ingredients to keep people persevering, innovating, caring for others, learning new things. We thrive on reinforcement. Science shows that even problems that seem intractable can have simple solutions. Consider John Snow. In 1854 in London, England, he proved that cholera was due to contaminated water. When he got the town to remove the Broad Street pump handle, the cholera epidemic ended. A deadly disease that had killed thousands of people over hundreds of years was stopped by a simple solution. So what is our pump handle? Is there a simple solution that could prevent the psychological and behavioral problems that have plagued us for centuries? The answer is nurturance. The school and family programs we've developed over the past 40 years nurture young people's development while preventing the most common and costly psychological and behavioral problems. But research also shows that our families and schools will never become as nurturing as they could be unless we evolve our capitalist system so that it serves the well-being of everyone. We have more people living in poverty than any other developed country and historic levels of economic inequality. These conditions strain families, increase conflict, and directly contribute to poor health and even suicide. Now we're beginning to see a growing number of people who understand that we must have an economic system that works for everyone. We have the knowledge we need to build the better world that Robert Kennedy challenged us to create.
I'm really an optimist. I think that we have the science to ensure that virtually every young person arrives at adulthood with the skills, interests, health habits, and values they need to live a productive life in caring relationships with other people. So I originally wrote this book as a memoir of the behavioral science revolution. And it was going to be a book that there were a lot more stories about what happened in Eugene. My publisher convinced me, though, that I needed to tell stories to show principles, to explain principles. So it kind of got cut down in terms of that. And so I'm all over the country talking about this stuff, but it just seemed to me that here in Eugene, I wanted to honor all of the people who've done such important work in the behavioral sciences. And so that's why we put this together tonight. The IOM report that was issued in 2009 has this statement. They concluded that we've learned enough about prevention to ensure that virtually every young person, well, I just said this in the video. I actually wrote it, but I don't usually tell people that because it just undermines the credibility of it. But I mean it. I think that if we can figure out how to put this stuff into practice, we can have a bigger effect on human well-being than anyone ever imagined. You know, I talk about how it would take, in 1850, it took 2.5 months to get from New York to San Francisco. Now you can do it in 6 hours, even in United Airlines. You know, it took a month to get a letter from Utah to California in 1850. And now you can talk to anyone in the world for free. Science has massively changed our world. And we've only gotten started on a science of human behavior over the last 50 years, really ramped up. So think about what could happen if we put what we've learned into practice. So that's my hope. This is a slide of from the Institute of Medicine report, and this shows the developmental phases. And each one of these bracketed items is something that has been shown, typically in multiple studies, to prevent typically multiple problems, and to prevent them with a good cost-benefit analysis. The money it costs to put these programs on is saved by all of the things that we are able to prevent. And so, and most of these things got either their start or a massive part of their start here in Eugene. So I'm going to skip this. You're going to have to read my book to know what the key components are, in my view, of this. But what I would like to do is introduce Carol Metzler, who is the science director, and you already met her, and she's going to talk about research on parenting interventions. And then I think Ed's going to talk next about direct instruction, and with a very interesting title, which I hope you'll repeat. And then Rob is going to talk about the ways in which we've learned how to improve social relations and social skills among kids in schools. So next, Carol Metzler.